Admiral Laura stood on the bridge of the horizon and watched Earth grow smaller through the viewing window. Behind her, 11 other ships formed a perfect line, their engines glowing blue against the darkness of space. This was the first fleet, and today they were making history. For the first time, humanity was reaching out to the stars not just to explore, but to say hello. Commander walked up beside her and smiled. He had served with for 15 years, and he had never seen her this nervous. She was hiding it well, but he knew her too well to be fooled. He placed his hand on her shoulder and nodded toward the window. "Beautiful sight," he said. Allowed herself a small smile. "It is. I just hope whoever is out there thinks the same about us." The fleet carried 3,000 souls, scientists, diplomats, translators, and doctors. They had brought gifts from every nation on Earth, music, art, literature, and the complete mathematical knowledge of human civilization. They had weapons too, but only for defense. The United Council had been clear about their mission. They were ambassadors, not soldiers. Lieutenant Cole sat at the communications station, her fingers dancing across the controls. She was young, barely 30, but she was the best linguist humanity had ever produced. She had spent 10 years studying theoretical alien languages, and now she would finally get to use that knowledge. The thought made her heart race with excitement. Dr. Price stood near the science station, reviewing data on his tablet. He was the chief science officer, a man who had dedicated his entire life to the question of whether humanity was alone in the universe. In a few weeks, he would finally have his answer. He could barely contain his joy. The fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives and the stars stretched into lines of light. They were heading toward the system, where deep space telescopes had detected strange signals. The signals were not natural. They were organized, mathematical, and clearly artificial. Someone was out there, and humanity was going to meet them. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of preparation, of rehearsing first contact protocols, of imagining what the aliens might look like and how they might think. Held meetings every day, making sure everyone knew their role. She wanted this to go perfectly. She needed it to go perfectly. On the final day of travel, Lieutenant Cole picked up new signals. They were coming from directly ahead, and they were much stronger than before. She ran them through her translation algorithms but found nothing recognizable. Still, the patterns were clear. These were warnings. Something was telling them to stop. "Admiral," Cole said, her voice tight with concern, "I think they know we are coming." Walked over to her station and looked at the data. The signals were repeating, over and over, in cycles of 3. She did not know what they meant, but she could feel the urgency in them. She turned to and saw the same worry in his eyes. "We stay on course," she said. "We came here to talk, and that is what we will do." The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and emerged into the system. What they saw made every person on every ship stop breathing. Hundreds of alien ships filled the space before them. They were massive, dark, and covered in weapons. They hung in the void like predators waiting for prey. Felt her blood go cold. This was not the welcome she had hoped for. She turned to Cole and spoke with a calm she did not feel. "Open all channels. Broadcast our greeting message on every frequency." Cole did as ordered. The message went out, a carefully crafted introduction explaining who they were and why they had come. It spoke of peace, of friendship, of a desire to learn and share. It was everything humanity had hoped to say to the universe. The response came in the form of weapons fire. The first ship to die was the Messenger. It carried the diplomatic corps, 200 men and women who had trained their whole lives for this moment. One moment it was there, and the next it was a ball of fire and debris. Watched it happen and felt something break inside her. "All ships evasive action," she shouted. "Get us out of here." The fleet scattered like leaves in a storm. The alien ships were faster, their weapons more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen. The Promise fell next, then the Unity, then the Hope. Each name felt like a knife in his heart. She had named those ships herself. She had believed in what they represented. Commander grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the escape pods. She fought him, screaming orders, trying to save her people, but was stronger, and he knew what had to be done. "You have to survive," he said. "Someone has to tell them what happened here." He pushed her into the pod and sealed the door. Through the small window, watched him run back toward the bridge. The horizon shook as weapons fire tore through its hull, never made it. 3 ships escaped, 3 out of 12. The horizon was not one of them. floated in her escape pod surrounded by debris and bodies and watched the alien fleet grow smaller as the survivors fled. She counted the dead in her mind. 2,712 people, scientists who wanted to learn, diplomats who wanted to talk, doctors who wanted to heal, all of them gone in minutes. Lieutenant Cole was on one of the surviving ships, so was Dr. Price. They had been lucky or perhaps just stationed on the right vessels at the right time. They picked up Spod and brought her aboard, but she barely noticed. She sat in silence, staring at nothing, replaying the massacre in her mind. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence, of grief, of questions with no answers. When they finally arrived, the whole world was watching, stood before the United Council and played the footage of the attack. She watched their faces change from hope to horror to something darker, something she had never seen in humanity before. "They gave us no warning," she said, her voice hollow. "They did not try to communicate. They saw us and they killed us. 2,712 people are dead because we dared to say hello." The council chamber was silent. President Daniel Grant stared at the frozen image of the alien fleet, his hands shaking with rage. General stood in the corner, his jaw tight, already planning what came next. And in the viewing gallery, a young officer named Peter Lane wiped tears from his eyes. His brother had been on the messenger. Looked out at the sea of faces, and spoke the words that would change humanity forever. "We went to them in peace. They answered with war. Now we must decide who we are going to be." The first fleet had departed with hope in its heart. The survivors returned with something else entirely, something that would take time to grow, to build, to sharpen into a weapon. Humanity had learned its first lesson about the universe. It was not a friendly place, and humanity would never forget. 1 year had passed since the massacre and Earth was a different world. The footage of the first fleet's destruction played on screens in every city, every home, every school. Children grew up watching those ships burn. Parents held their families close and looked up at the stars with new eyes. The universe had shown its true face, and humanity could not unsee it. Admiral Laura stood at the memorial wall in Geneva, her fingers tracing the names carved into black stone. 2,712 names. She knew them all. She had written letters to every family, attended every funeral she could, and carried the weight of their deaths on her shoulders every single day. Commander was near the top of the list. She touched his name and closed her eyes. "I should have died with them," she whispered. A voice spoke behind her. "Then who would have told us the truth?" She turned to find President Daniel Grant standing a few feet away. He was older now, his hair grayer, his face lined with the stress of leading a wounded species. But his eyes were sharp and focused. He had made a decision, and he had come to share it with her. "The council voted last night," he said. "We are building a second fleet." Felt something stir in her chest. It was not hope, not exactly. It was something harder, colder, more determined. She had spent the past year studying the aliens who had killed her people. Dr. Ellen Shaw had analyzed every piece of data they had brought back. She had given them a name, the Dominion. They were conquerors. They had swept across their region of the galaxy for thousands of years, destroying any species that could not serve them. They did not negotiate. They did not make peace. They saw other life forms as resources to be used or threats to be eliminated. Humanity was neither useful nor dangerous enough to spare, so they had tried to kill them all. But they had failed. 3 ships had escaped, 3 ships carrying proof of what they had done, and now humanity knew the truth. That would come for Earth eventually. It was not a question of if, but when. The only choice was whether humanity would be ready. General presented the plans for the second fleet at a closed council meeting, sat in the front row, listening to every word. The fleet would be different from the first. No diplomats, no scientists, no gifts of peace. This fleet would carry soldiers, weapons, and a single message. Humanity was not prey. "We will build 50 warships," said, his voice steady and cold. "Each one will be designed for war. We will use everything we learned from the first contact. We will study their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. And when the time comes, we will show them what humanity is capable of." The council approved the plan without a single vote against. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth agreed on something. They would build the second fleet together. They would face the together, and if they had to die, they would die together. Captain Peter Lane volunteered on the first day of recruitment. He was 28 years old, with dark hair and quiet eyes that held a grief he rarely spoke about. His brother had been a translator on the Messenger, one of the first ships to die. Peter had watched the footage so many times that he could see it when he closed his eyes. He would never stop seeing it. "Why do you want to serve?" the recruitment officer asked him. Peter thought about his brother. He thought about the message his brother had helped craft, the greeting that spoke of peace and friendship. He thought about how that message had been answered with weapons fire. "Because someone has to," he said. He was assigned to the Defiance, the flagship of the Second Fleet. It was still under construction, just a skeleton of metal in a shipyard orbiting Mars. But Peter could already see what it would become. A weapon, a promise, a response to that they would never forget. Admiral was offered command of the Second Fleet. She refused at first. The guilt was too heavy, the memories too fresh. She felt like a failure, a leader who had led her people into a slaughter. How could she ask anyone to follow her again? Dr. Ellen Shaw came to see her one night, carrying a bottle of wine and a folder full of research. They sat together in a small apartment, surrounded by boxes she had never unpacked. Shaw poured 2 glasses and pushed one toward the Admiral. "I found something," Shaw said, "something important." She opened the folder and spread documents across the table. They were transcripts of communications, intercepted and decoded over months of painstaking work. The messages told a story. They had destroyed dozens of species. They had wiped out entire civilizations without mercy or hesitation. But there was something else in those messages, something that made his heart beat faster. "They are afraid," Shaw said. "Not of us, not yet, but of something. They move through the galaxy like they are running from something bigger, and they destroy everything in their path because they cannot afford to leave threats behind them." Read the transcripts carefully. Shaw was right. They were not just conquerors. They were survivors of something terrible, something that had them so deeply that they could not trust any other species to live. They saw the universe as a battlefield where only the strongest could survive. "This does not excuse what they did," said. "No," Shaw agreed, "but it explains it, and explanations can become weapons." Finished her wine and stared at the wall. 2,712 names. The young lieutenant who had smiled as Earth grew smaller. The doctors who had packed medical supplies instead of weapons. All of them had believed in something better, and all of them had died for that belief. She could not bring them back, but she could make sure their deaths meant something. The next morning, she accepted command of the Second Fleet. Peter Lane met her for the first time at the Defiance shipyard. She was smaller than he had expected, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But when she looked at him, he felt like she could see straight through to his bones. She saw his grief, his anger, his determination, and she nodded as if she recognized something familiar. "You lost someone," she said. "My brother." "Then you understand why we have to do this." Peter nodded. "Yes, Admiral, I do." Turned back to the growing skeleton of the Defiance. Workers moved across its surface like ants, welding plates and installing systems. It would take years to finish, years of work and sacrifice and preparation. But when it was done, it would be the most powerful ship humanity had ever built. "The First Fleet departed with hope," said quietly. "The second will return with intent." Peter did not ask what she meant. He already knew. They all knew. They had started a war they could not imagine, and humanity was going to finish it. 3 years passed like a slow burning fire. Shipyards on Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies worked day and night. Factories produced weapons and armor at a pace humanity had never achieved before. Every nation contributed resources, scientists, and workers. The Second Fleet was not just a military project. It was a species-wide effort born from grief and shaped by determination. Chief Engineer Martinez had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the project began. She was 43 years old, with calloused hands and eyes that were always looking at problems no one else could see. She had designed the Defiance from scratch, studying every piece of wreckage from the First Fleet, learning from the technology that had killed so many. Now she stood on the observation deck of the Mars shipyard, watching her creation take final shape. The Defiance was beautiful in a terrible way. It was 3 times larger than any ship from the First Fleet, with armor plating thick enough to stop weapons and engines powerful enough to outrun their fastest vessels. Its weapons were mounted along every surface, a forest of guns and missile launchers that could tear through enemy hulls like paper. This was not a ship built for exploration or diplomacy. This was a ship built to kill. Admiral walked up beside her and studied the Defiance with tired eyes. "Will it be enough?" she asked. Consider the question carefully. She had asked herself the same thing every day for 3 years. The truth was she did not know. They had thousands of ships and thousands of years of experience. Humanity had 50 ships and a burning need to prove themselves, but had learned something during those 3 years. Humanity was different from other species. They adapted. They improved. They refused to accept limits. "It will be enough," she said, "because we will make it enough." Across the solar system, training camps pushed recruits to their breaking points. Lieutenant Amy Foster had graduated at the top of her tactical class and earned a position on the Defiance. She was small and quiet, with a mind that worked faster than most computers. She spent her days studying battle tactics, looking for patterns, searching for weaknesses. And she found them. They were powerful, but they were predictable. They had conquered so many species with the same methods that they had become lazy. They expected their enemies to flee or surrender. They did not expect resistance, and they certainly did not expect anyone to fight back with intelligence and creativity. Amy discovered that ships had a critical weakness near their engine cores. The armor there was thinner, designed to allow heat to escape. A precise strike at the right angle could cripple a ship in seconds. She brought her findings to Admiral, who smiled for the first time in months. "Good work, Lieutenant. Make sure every pilot knows this." Sergeant Victor Cole trained Marines for boarding operations in a facility deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was a large man with scars on his face and hands that had seen more combat than most soldiers twice his age. They did not use boarding tactics. They destroyed enemy ships from a distance, never giving their opponents a chance to fight back. Victor intended to change that. His Marines trained in zero gravity, learning to move and fight in the chaos of a breached ship. They practiced with weapons designed to pierce armor and explosives that could blow through alien bulkheads. They were not just soldiers. They were predators being taught to hunt. "They have never faced an enemy inside their own ships," Victor told his recruits. "They do not know how to handle close combat. That is our advantage. We will board their vessels, take their bridges, and show them what humans can do when we get our hands on them." Captain Peter Lane had risen quickly through the ranks. His calm under pressure and natural leadership had impressed Admiral, and she had promoted him to commander of the Defiance's fighter squadrons. It was a heavy responsibility, but Peter welcomed it. Every time he climbed into a cockpit, he thought of his brother. Every training mission was practice for the revenge he had waited years to claim. The Second Fleet conducted war games in the outer solar system, far from prying eyes. 50 ships moved in perfect formation, running simulated attacks against imaginary forces. They practiced ambushes and retreats, coordinated strikes and defensive maneuvers. They made mistakes and learned from them. They grew stronger with every exercise. During one such exercise, long-range sensors detected something at the edge of the solar system. It was small and fast, moving in patterns that no natural object would follow. A scout ship. The enemy had found them. Admiral made a decision in seconds. She ordered 3 ships to intercept the scout before it could report back to the Dominion. The chase lasted 6 hours, pushing human technology to its limits. But in the end, the scout was destroyed. Its debris scattered across the void, leaving no trace of its mission. "That was too close," said to her senior officers. "We need to move faster. They know we exist. They will come eventually." The final year of preparation passed in a blur of activity. Ships were completed, crews were assigned, and supplies were loaded. The Second Fleet assembled in orbit around Earth, 50 warships arranged in a formation that spoke of power and purpose. People on the ground looked up at the night sky and saw new stars moving among the old ones. They knew what those stars meant. Admiral addressed the fleet from the bridge of the Defiance. Her voice carried to every ship, every station, every corner of human space. She spoke of the First Fleet, of the hope they had carried and the price they had paid. She spoke of the 2,712 souls who had died believing in a better universe, and she spoke of what came next. "We do not seek conquest," she said. "We do not seek revenge. We seek something simpler and harder. We seek to make them understand their mistake." They looked at humanity and saw prey. They saw a species too young and too weak to matter. They were wrong. She paused, letting her words settle over the fleet. The First Fleet departed with hope in its heart. The Second Fleet returns with intent. Our intent is simple. We will show them what humanity truly is. We will make them remember this day for 1,000 years. And when it is over, the galaxy will know that humanity is not to be touched. The fleet began its final preparations. Engines warmed, weapons charged, and crews took their stations. In the command chair of the Defiance, Admiral watched Earth one last time. She thought of all the people down there, all the families and children and dreams that depended on what happened next. She thought of, and the names on that black stone wall. "All ships," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Engage faster-than-light drives, take us to." The second fleet disappeared into the stars, and this time they were not going to say hello. The second fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of territory. Before them lay a border outpost, a small station surrounded by a dozen patrol ships. It was nothing compared to the armada that had destroyed the first fleet, but it was a start. Admiral studied the tactical display with cold eyes. They had not detected them yet. Their sensors were pointed outward, watching for threats from deeper space, not from the direction of that primitive species they had exterminated years ago. They had made a mistake. They had assumed humanity was dead. "All ships battle stations," ordered. "Weapons free on my command." The second fleet spread into attack formation. 50 warships, each one carrying the weight of 2,712 souls. Captain Peter Lane sat in his fighter, hands steady on the controls, watching the station grow larger on his screen. Somewhere in that station, there were who had never heard of Earth. By the end of the day, they would know the name very well. "Fire," said. The first missiles crossed the distance in seconds. The patrol ships had no time to react. 3 of them exploded before they could even raise shields. The others scrambled to respond, but the human fleet was already on them. Beam weapons sliced through alien hulls, fighters swarmed around larger vessels, and they realized too late that they were not facing prey. The battle lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, the border outpost was debris and all 12 patrol ships were destroyed. The second fleet had not lost a single vessel. Admiral ordered the fleet to collect data from the wreckage, then move on to the next target. Supreme Commander received word of the attack 3 days later. He was an ancient, his scales darkened with age, his mind sharp from centuries of conquest. He sat in his command chamber and listened to the report with growing disbelief. "Humans," he said, "the same humans we destroyed at." "Yes, Supreme Commander. They have returned with a fleet of warships." Laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the chamber. He had overseen the destruction of 100 species. He had watched civilizations burn and worlds crumble. And now these humans, these brief little creatures from a single world, thought they could challenge the Dominion. "Send a patrol group to deal with them," he ordered. "Destroy their fleet and bring me proof of their extinction." The patrol group consisted of 30 ships, more than enough to handle any threat could imagine. They set course for the last known position of the human fleet. They never arrived. Admiral had anticipated the response. She had studied their patterns, their arrogance, their assumption that superior numbers would always win. She had positioned her fleet in an asteroid field along the patrol group's route. When they arrived, they flew straight into an ambush. Lieutenant Amy Foster coordinated the attack from the Defiance's tactical station. Her voice was calm as she directed fire, shifting targets with precision, exploiting the weakness near engine cores that she had discovered years ago. Ships exploded one after another, their crews never understanding what was happening. Commander Peter Lane led his fighters through the chaos. He had trained for this moment every day for 4 years. His squadron darted between enemy vessels, targeting weapon systems and shield generators. He felt no joy in the killing, only a cold satisfaction. This was for his brother. This was for everyone who had died believing in peace. 22 ships were destroyed. The remaining 8 fled back toward carrying tales of human tactics that made no sense, human aggression that all logic, received their reports and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: doubt. The second fleet struck 3 more outposts in rapid succession. Each attack was different, each one designed to keep the guessing. They hit supply lines, destroyed communication relays, and captured a command ship intact. Sergeant Victor Cole led the boarding action personally, his Marines fighting through corridors and compartments until they reached the bridge. The commander stared at the humans with wide, terrified eyes. He had never seen an enemy this close. He had never imagined that anyone would dare to board a vessel. Victor looked at him with contempt and spoke in broken phrases he had memorized for this moment. "You killed our people, now we kill yours." The captured ship provided invaluable intelligence. Data cores revealed fleet positions, supply routes, and the location of the home armada. Admiral studied the information carefully, planning her next move. She could strike at smaller targets forever, bleeding the Dominion slowly. But that was not why they had come. "We need to face their main fleet," she told her senior officers. "We need to make them understand that we are not going away, that we will never stop until they learn their lesson." The officers exchanged glances. Facing the home armada was suicide. They were outnumbered at least 2-1, possibly more. But they had known this day would come. They had prepared for it, and none of them were willing to turn back now. "Where do we find them?" Peter asked. Smiled grimly. "The system. The same place where they killed the first fleet. That is where we'll gather his forces. He will want to destroy us in the same place he destroyed our people before." The fleet set course for. As they traveled, composed a message to be broadcast when they arrived. She wrote and rewrote it a dozen times, trying to find the right words. In the end, she kept it simple. "To Supreme Commander and the Dominion. 4 years ago, your forces attacked a peaceful human fleet without warning or cause. You killed 2,712 of our people. You thought we were prey. You thought we would die quietly and be forgotten. You were wrong." She paused, then continued. "We have returned to the place where you murdered our people. We have come not for conquest, not for territory, but for something simpler. We have come to show you what humanity truly is. We have come with intent." The message was ready. The fleet was ready, and somewhere ahead in the darkness between stars they were waiting. Admiral sat alone in her quarters on the night before they reached. She looked at a photograph of the first fleet, taken on the day they departed Earth. She could see herself on the bridge of the horizon, younger and full of hope. She could see standing beside her, smiling. She could see the faces of people who had believed the universe could be kind. "I could not save you," she whispered, "but I can make sure you are remembered." She put the photograph away and went asleep. Tomorrow, history would change, and humanity would never be the same. The second fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and found the waiting for them. Over 100 ships filled the space around, their dark hulls blocking out the stars. Supreme Commander had gathered his finest vessels, his most experienced crews, and his deadliest weapons. He intended to crush these humans once and for all. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Defiance and counted the enemy ships. The odds were worse than she had hoped, better than she had feared. Her people were outnumbered, but they were not outmatched. They had trained for this, they had bled for this, and they were not going to fail. "Open all channels," she ordered. "Broadcast the message." Lieutenant Cole, who had survived the first fleet and returned for the second, transmitted Admiral recorded words across every frequency. The message reached every ship, every station, every listening post in the system. And in his command chamber aboard the flagship Eternal, Supreme Commander heard every word. "You thought we were prey," the message said. "You were wrong, we have come with intent." Snarled and cut the transmission. He had heard enough. These humans were brave, he would give them that, brave and stupid. They had walked into the killing ground where he had destroyed their first fleet, outnumbered, and he would enjoy watching them die. "All ships," he commanded, "destroy them." The battle began. Vessels surged forward in a wave of darkness and fire. Their weapons filled space with deadly light, beams and missiles that would have overwhelmed any fleet they had faced before. But the human ships did not flee. They did not scatter. They moved as one, shields overlapping, weapons coordinating, dancing through the chaos like they had been born in it. Lieutenant Amy Foster directed fire from the tactical station, her voice never rising above a calm murmur. She had memorized the position of every enemy ship, the weakness in every hull. Her command sent death lancing toward vessels with surgical precision. Engine cores exploded. Shields collapsed. Ships that had conquered worlds died in moments. Commander Peter Lane led his fighters into the heart of the enemy formation. His squadron followed him without hesitation, trusting his instincts, believing in his skill. They wove between capital ships, targeting weapons and sensors, crippling vessels so the larger human ships could finish them. Peter thought of his brother with every kill. He thought of the messenger burning in the void, and he did not stop. They had numbers, but the humans had something else. They had coordination, creativity, and a fury that the Dominion had never encountered. Human ships fought in ways that made no sense to tacticians. They retreated when they should have attacked, attacked when they should have retreated, and took risks that no rational species would take. They fought like they had nothing to lose. Sergeant Victor Cole watched the battle from the Defiance's marine bay. His people were ready, strapped into boarding pods, waiting for the order. They knew what came next. They had trained for it, dreamed of it, lived for it. When the order came, they would launch themselves its flagship and do what no one had ever done. They would take it. Admiral watched her fleet bleed. Ships were dying, human ships falling to weapons despite everything they had prepared. The Reliance went first, then the Steadfast, then the Valiant. Each loss was a knife in her heart, but she did not waver. She could not afford to. "Cole," she said over the command channel, "launch boarding pods, target the Eternal." Victor smiled and hit the launch button. His pods shot out of the Defiance and crossed the void towards flagship. A dozen other pods followed, carrying the best Marines humanity had ever produced. They punched through the Eternal's hull and breached into its corridors. And then the real killing began. They had never faced an enemy inside their ships. They did not know how to handle close combat, how to fight in tight spaces against opponents who did not care if they lived or died. Victor's Marines swept through the Eternal like a storm, clearing decks, taking positions, pushing toward the bridge. The fell before them in waves. Felt his flagship shudder and knew something was wrong. Reports flooded in, tales of human soldiers inside his ship, killing his crew, advancing toward his position. He roared orders at his guards, demanding they stop the invasion, but the humans kept coming. The bridge doors exploded inward. Victor Cole stepped through the smoke, his armor and bloody, his weapon raised. Behind him came his Marines, their faces hard, their eyes cold. They had lost brothers and sisters on the way here. They were ready to finish this. Face them with what dignity he could muster. He was old, but he was not afraid. He had lived for centuries and conquered countless worlds. He would not show fear to these creatures, these brief little animals who dared to challenge the Dominion. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why do you fight so hard for such a young species? You cannot win. Even if you take this ship, more will come. The Dominion is eternal." Victor thought about the question. He thought about his friends who had died in the corridors behind him. He thought about the First Fleet, about the peaceful people who had come here with gifts and hope. He thought about what humanity had been forced to become. "We fight because you gave us no choice," he said. "You looked at us and saw weakness. You saw a species too young to matter, but you were wrong. Humanity does not surrender. We do not give up. We do not accept that the universe belongs to those who kill without mercy." He stepped closer to. "We came here with intent. That intent was to show you, and everyone watching, that humanity will never be prey again." Outside, the battle was ending. The fleet had broken. Some ships fled, others surrendered, and many more drifted dead in the void. The Second Fleet had lost 15 vessels, thousands of lives, but they had won. Against all odds, against an empire that had conquered the stars, humanity had won. Admiral broadcast a final message as the last ship stood down. Her voice carried across the system, to every survivor, every witness, every species that might be listening. "The attacked humanity without warning and without cause. Today we have answered that attack, but we do not seek the destruction of your people. We do not seek to become what you are. We came here to deliver a message." She paused, her eyes on the battlefield before her. "Humanity desires peace. We always have. Our First Fleet came to you with open hands and hopeful hearts. You answered with murder. Now you know what we are capable of when pushed. Remember this day. Remember what happened when you tried to make us prey." She took a breath. "Any species that seeks peace will find humanity a friend. Any species that seeks war will find humanity waiting. The choice is yours." The Second Fleet gathered its wounded and began the long journey home. Admiral sat alone in her quarters, the weight of victory and loss pressing down on her. She had done what she set out to do. The would remember. The galaxy would remember. Humanity would never be underestimated again. 3 months later, she stood at the memorial wall in Geneva. New names had been added, the crews of the 15 ships lost at. But below those names, someone had carved new words into the black stone. The First Fleet departed with hope. The Second returned with intent. The Third will choose its own path. Trace the words with her fingers. She thought about the future, about the children who would grow up in a galaxy that now knew humanity's name. They would have choices their parents never had. They could be conquerors or peacekeepers, warriors or diplomats. The universe was open to them in ways it had never been before. She placed her hand on his name one last time. "We did it," she whispered. "They will remember us now." Above her, the stars burned with ancient light, and somewhere among them, humanity was just beginning.